Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be able to tell you more about a dear passion of mine, cultures and cultural diversity. So today we will explore why cultural intelligence is more important than ever in the current business setup and across industries. And in fact, when I started preparing this deck for you, I asked my teams where they felt this woman on the front page is from. And I had a few really interesting answers from North Africa to Asia. And actually, the answer is Cagliari in Italy. So it's really interesting to see how cultural bias works, even from a very multicultural and culturally aware team that is mine. So why am I here today? Apart from challenging status quo and your perception of culture, I really wanted to bring home what culture is all about and how that works and why it's important. I'm the founder of Creative Culture. My name is Melanie. I set up the business 13 years ago. We're a women-owned business certified by WEConnect, which is why we're here today. And we are a cross-cultural consultancy, and we advise brands on how to best communicate across different cultures, and more importantly, how to embrace cultural differences and build them into an opportunity and competitive advantage. And this really filters throughout the organization. Typically, we work a lot with Marcomms and advertising and insights and how to approach external audiences, but also internally with HR and learning and development and bringing this cultural intelligence to the teams as a whole. Personally, the reason I am here today as well is I was very lucky to have a multicultural upbringing. So I grew up around the world, from Taiwan to Brazil and Cameroon in my young years, hence those pictures. And then I started my teenagehood and my adulthood in Europe. So back in France for a few years, where I'm from originally, to move on to Spain and now the UK for the last 16 years. And really, it is this passion of cultures and languages in general that drove my career. So to start this session, let's quickly run through what culture is and give it a definition, because very often it is being misused, misinterpreted, and misunderstood. So let's look at the Cambridge Dictionary definition, if you will. So the way they define culture is a way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. So there are a few things here that are really interesting. The first one is that it applies to different types of culture, because often there is a confusion between corporate culture, country cultures, subcultures, and different communities. But in reality, what this definition tells us is that they respond to very similar mechanics. They are fundamentally a group of people who are gathered together, share some values, and work towards a similar sort of goal. Another interesting aspect here is that it mentions that it's evolving all the time, and hence this need to always have an eye out for all of these changes on an ongoing basis, particularly at a time where the world is mixing more and more. And then I guess lastly, the really important point is that is a real driver of behavior. And it's one that is very unconscious, that none of us are aware of, but it really drives our decisions day in, day out. And this applies to businesses internally, externally. It's really about understanding who we are communicating with, working with on a daily basis, and so on and so forth. We've been really lucky at Creative Culture to be able to publish a paper on culture this year, early on, and where quite a few external stakeholders and experts contributed, including a client, Jan Niska, who is Global Patient Strategy Lead at the virtual healthcare team at Sanofi. And he really raised some very interesting data around health and the role of culture within health. And actually, some studies demonstrate that 50% of the determinants of health are influenced by culture and behavior. And more so when you look at a granular level like cardiovascular health, 80% of the outcomes are driven, again, by culture and behavior. So let's, in a moment, go through a video that we published earlier this year, and we can talk about it a bit more in a second. So this video was put together particularly around the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, one that is very important, of course. And it really demonstrates, again, how when you're in a cross-cultural setting, it is very important to be aware of all the differences and where countries stand in terms of their perspective on a specific topic. So I think the data really speaks for itself. And here we are looking, obviously, at country cultures. And whilst this has a D&I focus, and we're trying to sort of put forward the fact that you wouldn't be able to put forward the same strategy across all markets exactly in the same way because you need to be sensitive to these differences, it also puts forward the fact that these mechanics are the same across the organization, and they apply both to internal, external comms, HR, but also supply chain management, something that we're all aware of through WEConnect. And our world is really culturally diverse, and that's what makes it fascinating, globally and more at a domestic level. What defines our success is our ability to embrace diversity, and cultural diversity in this case, and to be inclusive of all people who surround us and we work with and communicate with. This slide is interesting because 2020 was a turning point for cultural diversity. A world pandemic and the murder of George Floyd is what it took to the world to start listening. Personally and professionally, this had made sense to me from a very young age, but until then, nobody was listening. Personally, I'd been immersed in so many wonderful cultures and traditions, absorbing them all. And when I got back to Europe and France at the age of 10, I was really challenged by my own culture being 100% French, which I found really difficult to identify with. For many years, all I wished was to go back to my previous life, the one where I could learn so much about different ways of speaking, eating, celebrating, and always learning. Not that it was always that easy and that the countries I had lived in weren't facing their own challenges and societal issues, but it was really the human experience that I was thriving for. Professionally, I'd spent my career defying the status quo of internationalization, bringing home the fact that the traditional global local models don't work because they're too complex, they're not agile enough. But most importantly, the local markets and the local cultures weren't being heard. Centralization can only work if it doesn't mean standardization. We are different and we must embrace this and enrich our processes and ways of working with this in mind. And local had to be brought to the fore and always be part of the decision-making process. And so this is how I started Creative Culture in 2008. More than a business, it was really a belief that things could be done differently and things could be done better. But at the time, again, and for many years, people weren't listening. 12 years on in 2020, people were finally listening. The reason I'm saying this is because listening is great, and obviously it's been really a huge milestone and a huge improvement to the previous years. That being said, it is now time to act. It's time to acknowledge the power of cultural diversity. It is our responsibility as businesses and organizations to really educate and empower people to come to this common understanding. Speaking, eating, acting, and living differently is wonderfully enriching, and I speak from personal experience. So if doing the right thing is not enough or doesn't seem enough to you, I hope this data speaks for itself. There is a study from McKinsey in 2017 that demonstrates that ethnic and cultural diversity account for a 33% likelihood of outperformance of EBIT margin. There's another study from 2014 that raises that among participants, 95% of senior executives from 100 top global corporations feel that the cultures of the local markets can make or break their success. So it's really interesting because we go back to the sort of understanding that culture really has an influence, and it's not just one that relates to personal preference. It's also one that can actually be a generator or not of business, of good relationships, of great working teams, and so on and so forth. To wrap up this session, I really wanted, in line with WEConnect's ambition as an organization, but also with our drive and passion at Creative Culture for gender and cultural diversity, to wrap up the session honoring some but only a few of these great women who've made a real difference in driving change in our societies. From Tawakkol Karman to Mother Teresa, Marie Curie, Indira Gandhi, and Coco Chanel, they all drove progress in a range of areas, from fashion to politics, health and arts. And they all came with different backgrounds and cultures, but with a common goal: to move forward together, united. So let's not allow differences or cultural differences to stop progress, but allow them to feed it instead. Let's stop listening only, and let's start acting as well. Thank you very much.